So you are in the right place for career changes, transition with People's Resource Center. PRC has been around since 1975. This year is actually our 50th anniversary. We serve any resident of DuPage County. If you need more information about PRC, you can certainly find that on our website, which is peoplesrc.org. Guidelines for our virtual workshop. So I ask that you mute yourself for better sound quality. Feel free to turn on your video if you'd like. It's always nice to see a friendly face. As Matt mentioned, you can use your chat function to type any questions that you have. And so just to kind of be aware, you could use the side-by-side mode at the top middle for the presentation for better viewing. Everything that's said in this presentation is confidential. This workshop is recorded, just to be aware of that. So People's Resource Center, if you're not familiar with us, we have a food pantry in Wheaton and Westmont. We do adult learning and literacy. So that's GED, that is citizenship, that is ESL tutoring. We also do health literacy classes. We have an art studio with a kiln at our main locations for classes for adults, families, and children. We do a clothes closet in Wheaton and in Westmont. So if you need clothes, we have that available. We do computer training and access. So that's, we can give you a computer if you need that for school or work. We can also help connect you to classes to help you be certified Microsoft Office and Excel. We have job search assistance. One-to-one job coaching is our main focus. We also do resume writing. We have an online job board, and we do workshops like this throughout the county. And as mentioned, all of our services are free to any resident of DuPage County. So career change, planning and preparing for a successful transition. So kind of what are our goals today? One is to understand how to plan and prepare for a career change. As in any job search, they don't happen by accident. They happen through kind of planning strategy. And so we're going to talk about the various steps and tools that can assist you in the process. Hopefully you're going to walk away today with a little bit more confidence than when you signed on. So why do people change careers? New opportunity, better pay or benefits. Sometimes people just want more fun. Um, fulfillment, opportunity to give back, job security. There could be layoffs, dismissals. Maybe you're unhappy with your current career or employer. Recession or pandemic-proof employment. Your dream career has changed. And I say all of these things because I'm sure everybody on this call has different reasons and goals for wanting to change their career. There's no one right reason for wanting to pursue that change. So what is difficult about changing careers? It's stressful and a lot of work, right? It can feel like starting over. There's unknown impact on finances, right? If we're trying to figure out what does that look like. Unsure of whether or not you're going to enjoy it, right? We can do all the research in the world, but until we're in that position, in that role, we don't really know. And so it can require new skills or knowledge. So if you're currently employed, I always recommend don't quit your current job without a game plan, if you can. So I want to talk about career pivot versus career leaps. So that can be career clusters, right? There might be something a little bit similar to kind of what you do now. So that could be your current role in a different industry, or that could be even different positions within your company, your current company. So if you have if you're, part of a big corporation, you could look at just changing positions within your current company. I tend to think that career pivots sometimes they can work a little bit easier in terms of career leaps because career pivot kind of has a consistent kind of narrative or somebody can track with you about some of the changes that you've made. So we're going to talk a little bit about having kind of career narratives. What does that mean? How do you explain them to an employer so that they can kind of make sense of what your journey is and how that fits in with what they need and what their goals are. So in order to, any job search is about committing to the process. So that's being prepared. It's going to take some time. You want to conduct a kind of an honest self-assessment. Research, research, research. I was just talking with somebody yesterday, and they made a significant career transition for themselves. And they said it took them about 2 years to kind of figure all of that out. Everybody's timeline is different, but just be aware it's not usually something that happens overnight. Network is even more important when you're trying to do career transition. And then preparing your story. So we're going to talk about all of those different things. So self-assessment, right? No one knows you better than you do, hopefully. There's no career advisor, AI resource that's going to be able to tell you this is what you should do. Nor should you kind of give all of that power over to any other kind of source or tool. What people can do is ask you good questions and kind of give you some guidance. So, why are you considering a change? Kind of what's the extent of your desired change? What are your strengths and your interests? What is or isn't in alignment with your career, right? Maybe you started your career thinking you'd have more set hours and then it's creeped into you have odd hours, you're not always able to be home the way that you want. You're doing more work than you thought you would be doing. What has changed in your career that you don't really like? And this is important. Kind of what moments or situations have brought you joy in your career, right? Are there certain things that you really love? Are there certain experiences that you've had in your job that you really enjoy? Just to kind of sit and think, well, why did I really enjoy that? What skill does that present in me? What value could I bring to an employer, in that moment? So listen to how do you find your strengths? Like listen to feedback, right? If you're not sure, ask, former colleagues that you've worked with, ask people that are close to you that you feel like are going to give you an honest but kind perspective of what are your strengths. Pay attention to like when are you most productive? What do you most enjoy? When have you been most recognized for something at any point in your life or in your career, right? Conduct a simple SWOT analysis, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And then there's online resources that can kind of help you figure out what are your key strengths and interests. My favorite one is through ONET Online. We're going to talk a little bit more about that resource. But they have a really simple interest profiler to help you figure out, okay, well, what do I like? What do I think I'm good at? That can be helpful in just having some sort of self-awareness. So this is kind of a simple example of like a SWOT analysis, kind of what do you think are your strengths? So in here, professional qualifications that you have, um, you know, your expertise in some area over time, projects or campaigns or things that you've completed successfully. What are your weaknesses, right? Maybe you're not as up to date on a certain skill. Maybe you're realizing that maybe there's a language requirement or things like that. So what are kind of weaknesses that you can grow or work on? What are opportunities, right? Are there any kind of significant changes or advancements happening in your industry that you can take part of? Um, are there new positions or opportunities that you're aware of through either your network or even within your own organization? And then kind of what are the threats, right? So, the threats could be technology changes. It could be maybe the political climate. There could be a number of things to just be aware of what's going on. And this is going to look different for every person. So, one of your threats might be, having to take care of family members in a couple of years, and that's going to change kind of what your work requirements are. So that's going to look different for every person. But it can be helpful to just kind of sit down, write that out, and think about that. And think about, so, strengths and weaknesses are internal, and opportunities and threats are external. So they're external to yourself. So that can be a way to help kind of frame kind of what are your strengths and your weaknesses. So we're going to talk a little bit about resumes now, and then we're going to talk a little bit about resumes going forward. So this is often a question I get about how do I craft my resume for a career transition? What do I put or what do I not put? Matt has a ton of resources there at the Addison Library. I also have resources specific to resumes. Kind of the three main points that I want to talk about in terms of career transition or making those changes are lead with transferable skills, right? So, and think about what that is, right? We tend to think about our skills in terms of the jobs that we've done. But you could have skills, for example, let's say you took a lot of time off to take care of family, right? And you think, well, what did I do during that time? Well, maybe you were managing logistics. Maybe you were calling doctors. Maybe you were doing administrative work and setting up appointments. And you're doing like medical advocacy. There's can be a lot of different skills that we utilize that aren't necessarily within our jobs. that can be transferable skills, right? So if you do, project management, if you've been, maintaining and managing your household and you've got kids, that's a lot of work. And so those are things that you can present to an employer that you can put on your resume in an appropriate way so that employers can know that you do have these skills, that you've used them. Show what you're learning, right? That's always, um, so that's always a good thing. So if you're taking a class, if you brushed up on a skill, right? Show how you're kind of moving forward, how you're trying to kind of improve your value for an employer. And you do want to tailor your resume every single time that you apply for a position. And so you want to use the same language that the employer uses. So an example that I can give that's pretty straightforward is we had a client that she wanted to work for Ulta Beauty as a manager, and she had a lot of experience. She'd worked at Macy's. But she applied and she got one of those immediate, like, thanks, but no thanks types of emails. And she was really frustrated. She didn't really understand. Well, we looked at her resume and we looked at the job description, and her resume had a lot of customer service oriented things, but Ulta doesn't call their customers customers, they call them guests. So we shifted the language in her resume to say guest instead of customer service. And she got through, she got the interview, and she got the job. So when I'm talking about tailoring every time, I'm talking about what is the language that's used in that job description? What is the language that the employer is using? And if you're kind of applying within the same industry, you're not necessarily having to rewrite your resume every time, but you do want to be aware of what language is being used in that job description. And if people have more questions about that, I can answer that at the end. Identify necessary skills. So you're going to want to look at job postings and think about how your skills relate. So along with tailoring your resume, long gone are the days of having like a one and done resume that you just kind of send out, right? So you want to kind of identify job postings, think about your skills. So sometimes like there could be, you see a lot of things and there's a need to know like a certain technology like Salesforce or Adobe, right? And you think, well, I don't really know that, but I could brush up on that or I could learn that. You can use a skill matching tool like TagCrowd to identify keywords. You can also use things like Resume Worded. Those are free resources that we're going to talk about. You can go on LinkedIn and look at the profiles of people who have the job that you want, right? See kind of what's their background. If you're seeing certain themes and how they talk about themselves, how they present themselves, or any experience they have, that can be kind of a key to, okay, how do I want to reframe, um, you know, what I'm presenting to kind of match where things are right now. And you want to look at your work history and describe, their roles. You want to look at all of those things. All of these things take some time, right? You're not going to necessarily be able to do them in an hour in an afternoon. But all of these reflections and thinking about necessary skills and kind of where you are and tailoring your resume helps save you time when you start applying and navigating that job search in the way you want. Transferable skills, which I mentioned. So what are your skills, both hard and soft skills that you have from your previous career or industry, right? Which skills are most relevant to the new one, right? So if a lot of the jobs that you're looking for have, proven leadership ability as a requirement, how can you demonstrate that? There's a huge need for soft skills that most people have, but they don't necessarily know how to talk about them or present them. So hard skills can be a little bit easier to learn. Soft skills are harder to teach somebody. So soft skills are, navigating conflict situations, interacting with people. Hard skills tend to be more, software skill or hard thing that you can demonstrate in a quantifiable way. Um, and think about, and if you're not sure, you're just going to start, well, what have I been doing in the last 10 to 15 years? What skills were involved with that? And how might you build on them or enhance them? Which ones should you highlight for the position that you're applying for? And these are just kind of most transferable skills, right? Problem solving, reasoning, listening. And people go, listening's a skill. Listening's a really important skill. Most people don't do it well. So if you have an ability to kind of demonstrate how you did that, attention to detail, project management, relationship building, right? You can think about all of these things in a way, and how are you going to demonstrate that you can do them? Again, closing skills gaps. So that could be online classes, that could be graduate degree programs, certification programs. But I do want to say there's a lot of opportunity to learn and gain skills that don't necessarily have to cost you anything. So the library might have resources to connect you to classes. PRC has certification classes in certain things that are free. So there's a lot of opportunity to learn that's not necessarily going to be cost prohibitive. Mentoring programs, industry events or conferences, professional organizations, volunteering can be a great way to, network, um, boost your confidence and gain some skills. So there's lots of different ways that you can close skill gaps without necessarily going back to get a degree. ONET Online, which is probably one of my favorite resources. If you're not familiar with it, it's a really amazing. I just used it the other day to help a client, and she was interested in like forensic psychology. So I typed that in there, and it came up with like a cluster of words, a cluster of jobs, and like you can click through them, find out additional information. So this is through the Department of Labor, and it can have information about what's an up and coming position, what skills are needed, what's the hiring outlook, what's the, rate of pay in our area. It can give you a lot of information and ideas about, if you were thinking of an administrative role, you could type that in there and it's going to come up with clusters of roles around that that maybe you haven't thought about but would be of interest to you. And then if you're really not sure, My Next Move, which is a sister site of ONET Online, can kind of help you kind of just start with more browsing, right? If you're not sure. And this is, again, it's a free tool. I really think that they're excellent tools to kind of do some basic research, figure out what do you want, why, what are you looking for, and kind of understand the expectations in a particular industry or role. Networking, which is the word most people don't like. If you're anything like me, when I was in college, I thought of networking as like going to like awkward Hilton conference rooms in like stuffy business suits and having awkward conversations with people. That's one part of networking, but networking is a lot broader than that. The vast majority of jobs are gotten through networking. And so networking is talking to your friends about, what are your desires? What are you hoping for? Um, you know, what kind of role do you want? Where are you going? Right. And so it's can be offering to take somebody out for coffee one-on-one if you're trying to kind of learn more about their role. That's joining LinkedIn communities, attending virtual conferences, attending workshops like this where you can connect with other people. There's gonna be like meetups, but that can also be if you go to the same coffee shop every week, and the barista says, "Hey, how are you?" Instead of going fine, you could say, "Hey, I'm looking for this type of role," or, I'm really passionate about community service, and they might know something, right? Think about networking as building connections rooted in trust, right? That's what networking is. That's why most jobs are gotten through networking because an employer wants to trust the person that they're receiving information from, right? That could be, another employee who recommends you. And if they like that employee, then they're more likely to look at your application. So networking is just about building connections. Um, if you're really intimidated by the idea of just going and talking with people, you can connect with me or Matt. We can certainly give you tips and tricks on how to kind of present yourself to other people. But networking is really going to help you in a career transition because these are people that can know you, that can speak to you, that can help bridge that gap if you're making a big transition. For an employer who maybe they don't understand the transition that you're making, but having somebody there that can advocate for you or speak to your ability can be really helpful. So how do you communicate your transition story? So what needs to be communicated, right? Why are you making a change? Kind of what skills do you possess? And what are you doing to address any skill gaps if you have them, right? And how do you do that? You do that through your resume. You can do that through your cover letter, your professional summary, your elevator pitch, which is also the like first question you get in an interview, which is tell me about yourself. You can do that through LinkedIn profile. You talk about that in networking. But you're also going to talk about that in an interview, right? Someone's going to say, if you're leaving a position, why are you leaving your position? Or what have you been doing for the last, 10 years if there's been a gap on your resume? So all of, how you're communicating this is going to come up throughout your whole job search process. And it needs to be a consistent narrative. And it needs to be something that you practice and feel comfortable with, right? How we communicate for a job search is not normally how we communicate in everyday life. So that's a skill that needs to be practiced so that you feel comfortable talking about yourself in all of these different areas. And again, it's about connecting the dots, right? So you want to highlight your transferable skills again. It's like, I think my third or fourth time mentioning the transferable skills. So how have they added to your track record and how are they going to benefit your new employer, right? So looking for a job is a value added conversation, right? What value are you adding to the employer? And then in turn, what value is the employer adding to you, right? You're having the same conversation from different perspectives. So you want to focus on the value that the employer is looking for and how you meet that value. So again, focus on what you can contribute instead of what you lack. So often we can look at job descriptions and go, well, I don't have this one thing. But maybe you have 80% of that and you're really interested and passionate about that role. Um, Focus on that and how you're gonna in what you can bring in your passion, and apply for it, right? And then, use SAR statements or sometimes they're called STAR statements, right? To answer behavioral interview questions. So that's usually so we teach like situation, action, result, and tie-in. But they're pretty much formats to answer behavioral interview questions. And talking about, your past behavior and how that's an indicator of future behavior. And it's kind of to help fill in the so what's, right? And a lot of these formats, and Matt can share formats with you, they're designed to help you focus in answering questions. So sometimes if we're interviewing, we can get nervous and we can forget kind of important parts of our answer, or we can go on rambling sprees. So some of these formats and tools and tricks are there to help guide you to kind of stay on track during the whole process. So communicating your transition plan. So this is an example of somebody who their background was in the US government and they went back to school. They wanted to be a geologist. And so they completed their degree and they were applying for positions, and their fellows, graduates were getting interviews, but they weren't getting anything. And so they came and talked with a job coach and said, I'm not hearing back from anybody. Like, I don't really understand what I'm doing wrong. And often what it is if you're making a really big transition, again, what we talked about is connecting the dots. Like employers, they may not understand, well, if you worked in a government position and now you want to be a geologist, like what does that mean? And so he figured out how to talk about, I've been in all these different places in my life and in my career, and you can pretty much drop me anywhere to do any kind of project, and I'm going to be successful and thrive in that. And so that's what he communicated in his cover letter and in the interview to help kind of bridge that gap for people that didn't really understand the transition that he was making. He had to fill that in for people. So when you're thinking about communicating your transition plan, if there really is a stark difference between where you were and where you're going, you want to kind of fill in those gaps. So another kind of semi-famous example was a couple years ago, someone got a position at the Emmys as I think a producer there, a production designer there. And her background was running a dance studio. And so in her cover letter, she kind of broke down all of the ways that she could meet that role and all of the experience she had in terms of like navigating problematic clients, high maintenance individuals, having to organize productions. She was able to kind of fill in those gaps, and the producers were so impressed with her explanations that she got an interview and she ended up getting the position. So think about if somebody didn't know anything about you and you're making a big transition or there's been a gap, what would somebody need to know for them to go, aha, I understand, where you are and where you're going. For more seasoned workers, it's not unreasonable to feel, a desire for change. And transitioning doesn't necessarily mean that you have to begin at the bottom of your career ladder. And so experience, maturity, and tenure can outweigh some skill gaps, right? If you're an older worker, you probably have a lot of soft skills in navigating situations, navigating, other coworkers, conflicts, whatever that is, that maybe somebody half your age doesn't have those experiences. So don't discount what that is and think, if I'm making a transition, that means I have to start over. That's not necessarily true. And so there's ways that people like Matt and myself can help you navigate that. But, think about all of the skills that you bring, all of the wisdom that you have. And I think when we're really good at something, we don't necessarily always recognize that we are good at that because it just comes naturally to us. So that's where having, like we said earlier, having another person that can reflect back to you, well, you're really good at X, Y, and Z, because you might not think of it as a big deal if that's what you're good at. So having just kind of being aware of that and having someone else kind of advocate for you can be helpful in figuring out how you want to navigate that transition. So how do you know that you're kind of ready, right? You want to practice your story on kind of trusted family and friends, right? You want to finalize kind of your resume, your cover letter, to include kind of what is your new transition story. And I said before, like, you don't need to just have one resume, but you can have a general template of your resume and your cover letter to kind of get started to work from. If you want to complete any certifications or skills assessments, or if you need to kind of brush up on a skill, or take a class or something, you want to make sure that that's available, that people can see that. If you're trying to kind of bridge a skill gap you think is going to stand in your way. And show your passion. So I have a sweet volunteer, and he says, nothing is ever going to make up for enthusiasm, right? So you want to stay positive, you want to be, show you're serious, have everything done, but genuine, demonstrate a genuine passion for your career, because it's going to take you farther. I know, and I'm sure Matt can speak to this as well, as someone who's done a lot of interviews. The enthusiastic, super engaged person is always going to generally win out over someone that I'm not sure if they want to be in the room. So if you're enthusiastic, if you're engaged and you're passionate, you can't teach someone that. And that's a really valuable thing to bring to an organization. So don't discount that in your journey. And then there's benefits to a career change, right? You can develop new skills, hopefully earn more money, achieve greater happiness or freedom, find work more interesting. You learn how to adapt, right? And then you can be more in control of your career. You can develop new relationships, and you can, jumpstart or revive your career in the midst of all those transitions. So kind of what's your next move, and like, where are you kind of in your journey? And that's going to look different for every person. And so I'm going to stop sharing. I went through that pretty quickly. But does anybody have any questions about any of that?